In this video, we're going to talk about sine and cosine law from your skills review package in case you've forgotten how to do it. So for sine and cosine law, this is a method that you can use to solve for angles and sides in any type of triangle. We traditionally use it in triangles that do not have a right angle, but you can also use them for ones that do have right angles. So sine law is sine of angle A over side A. Gives us the same ratio as if we do sine of angle B divided by side B, and that's the same thing as if we do sine of angle C divided by side C. So all the angles are uppercase letters, all the sides are lowercase letters, and you'll notice that the sides and the angles are across from each other. They have the same letter. Cosine law is a squared equals b squared plus c squared minus 2bc times cosine of angle A, or there's also a rearranged formula if you're trying to solve for just the angle. In these ones here, how do you know the difference between sine law and cosine law? When I'm using sine law, I'm looking for an angle and an opposite side that I know both values for. To use cosine, I usually use it when I can't use sine law. So I'm going to take a look at my very first question here. We have triangle DEF, and it has two angles, one side, and an unknown that I'd like to find. So first thing you should do is start by labeling. So if this is angle D, this is side D, angle E, side E, angle F, side F. So what I want to do is decide sine law or cosine law. So for sine law, I need to find an angle and an opposite side that I know both values for. And if I look at pair D, I actually have an angle and a side. So I can use sine law for this. So when I go to do my formula, I'm not going to use A, B, and C since I don't have A, B, and C. I have D, E, and F. So I'm going to do sine of D over D, and I picked that because that's the one I know both values for. And then the second pair we're going to choose is the one that has what we're looking for. So I would like to find X. So I'm going to do E, so sine E over E. And then I'm going to substitute in the things that I know. So sine of D is 75. And side D is 15.5. And then I have sine of angle E, which I don't know. That's a bit of a problem. We'll come back to that. Over side E, which is X. So you can only solve for one letter at a time when you're using sine law or cosine law. So there really needs to be a way for me to find angle E. And in the previous page, we talked about the angles in a triangle. So angles in a triangle add to 180 degrees. So since I know that this one is 75 and this one is 40, I actually can find that angle by subtracting 180, take away 75, take away 40. And I get 60, oh, you can't actually see that, 65 degrees. So angle E is actually 65 degrees. So from here, what we want to do is cross multiply to get rid of the denominators. So I'm going to do X times sine of 75 equals 15.5 times sine of 65. Now, I would like to isolate for X, which means to get it all by itself. So that's sine of 75. Right now, we are multiplying X times sine 75. So we're going to take that to the other side and divide. So I have 15.5 times sine 65 divided by sine of 75. And then I'm just going to work that out on my calculator. So 15.5 times sine of 65 divided by sine of 75. And I end up with 14.54. Now that is centimeters. And because I rounded, I am going to put that little dot there to show that it's an approximate value that I had to round. All right, let's take a look at the next one. All right, in this triangle, it doesn't have any letters. So you can actually call it anything you like. You can do ABC, you can do PQR, It doesn't really matter. So I like to stick with A, B, and C. It doesn't really make a difference. So I'm going to call this ABC. And if I take a look, this is going to be side A, side B, side C. And then I'm going to look to see whether I need to use sine law or cosine law. So I'm looking for that angle side pair, and I actually know these two values, which would be pair C. So I'm going to use sine C over C. And then I want my unknown, which is x, so we're going to do sine B over B. And then we substitute in. So sine of 35.8 divided by 42 equals sine of x, I don't know what b is, divided by 64. Now, same thing we did in the last question, we are going to cross multiply. I always like to do the part with the x first, but it's up to you. So I'm going to do 42 times sine x equals 64 times sine of 35.8. Okay, now this is not sine of 42. This is 42 times sine of x. So the first thing I'm going to do is move the 42 to the other side by dividing, since it's multiplication going on between these two things. So I get 64 times sine of 35.8 divided by 42. And then I can work that out as a decimal, or I can wait and do it on my calculator. To get rid of the sine, it's a sine without a number, it's just sine of x, we're going to do the inverse sine. Also, I am solving for an angle, so that's how I know when to do the inverse sine. And actually, let's work out this number as a decimal just to make it a little easier here. So 64 times 35.8 sine divided by 42 gives me 0.891364,076. And then I want to do the inverse sine of that. And I get 63.05 degrees. And I did round that, so I put the dot on the equal sign. And there we go. All right, the next one here, I have another triangle. So I'm going to start by just labeling A, B, and C. It doesn't really matter what letters I choose. I'm going to actually do the same thing I did last time. So here's A, B, and C. So this is going to be side A, side B, side C. And then I want to look for sine law for an angle and a side pair. So I know an angle of 50 degrees, but I don't know the side. And then these two angles, unfortunately, I can't figure out without using some type of trigonometry. So I don't have an angle and a side pair. So this would be a triangle that I would use cosine for. Cosine is really good if you have two sides and a contained angle, so the angle in between those two sides. It also works really well if you have three sides and absolutely no angles. So when I'm doing cosine law, we should always start with the letter that's the angle. So in this case, I called this b. So I'm going to start my equation with b squared. And then the other two sides. So it equals a squared plus c squared. And then minus 2, and I repeat these two, ac, cosine of my angle b. So we always start and end with the same letter, and then we use the other letters in the middle. And this letter should coincide with the angle that you have. Okay? So here, I don't know b, that's x squared. A is 10 squared. C is 12 squared minus 2 times a, which is 10, and c, which is 12, times cosine of 50. Okay, I actually like to do a lot of this on my calculator all at once, and I am going to work all of this part out in a second. So 10 squared, there we go. So 10 squared plus 12 squared minus 2 times 10 times 12 times cosine of 50. Don't hit equals until you get to the very end of that. So I have 89.73097368. Now that doesn't really look like that side, and I know we already had one previously in the package that didn't fit the scale, but that angle kind of looks like roughly 50 degrees, so I'm thinking that's not right. Now the trick here is the square. This is actually what x squared equals. So to get rid of the square, I'm going to take the square root, which is approximately 9.47 centimeters. And I'm going to put the dot to show that I rounded. Okay, our last question here. Right. Same thing, we're going to start by labeling. Now this one actually has letters. We have L, M, and N. So this is going to be little l, this is going to be little m, this is going to be little n. I always use a cursive L, otherwise it looks like a 1. So do I have an angle and an opposite side that I know both values of? No, I don't actually know any of the angles. So this would be an excellent time to use cosine law. Now, I always said we start with the angle. So in this case, this is the angle I want to find. So we're going to start with L. So I'm going to do L squared equals n squared plus m squared minus 2nm cos L. Or I could actually use my rearranged formula that's up here, which says cosine of, in this case it would be L, equals, and then the other two, so n squared plus m squared minus L squared over 2mn. So I think I'm actually going to try that formula. So I'm going to turn my little L into a cos here. So cosine of angle L is the other side. So n squared plus m squared minus L squared. It's helpful if you think about A as being the angle when you're using the formula, and it makes it a little easier to figure out what sides are what here. And then 2nm. So cosine of x equals 21 squared plus 18 squared minus 23 squared over 2 times 21 times 18. Now, I'm going to work out the numerator and the denominator separately first to make this a little bit easier. So 21 squared plus 18 squared minus 23 squared is 236. And then on the bottom, 2 times 21 times 18 is 756. And then to get rid of the cosine, it doesn't have a number with it, so we are going to do the inverse. Also, I am solving for an angle, so that's how I know when to use the inverse. So I have to do the division first, so I'm going to do 236 divided by 756 to get the number, and then I do the inverse cosine. Otherwise, you want to do inverse cosine bracket, and then 236 divided by 756 if you can see it on your calculator. And I end up with 71.81 degrees. And that's sine and cosine law.